Hi everyone, this is Anna again. Most of you know me as Anna Sophia Canetti, and some of you know me by other names. I have been a libertarian activist for not so long, probably about 3 or 4 years, but I have always been independent and I have aligned myself with this party. I live in San Diego and I very much enjoy the climate here, and I always welcome guests. And here's my guest tonight. It's Max Abramson, and please introduce yourself to us.
I'm Max Abramson. I'm a state representative in New Hampshire, going on my second term, and I'm now running for president.
Okay, so why are you running for president?
To bring the troops home.
All right, let's talk about that. That's the most important topic here, I think.
So I worked as a merchant mariner for 12 years, and we carried a lot of our armed service personnel over into the Middle East. We went into the same theaters of operation that they went into, but we would drop them off, and our merchant ships would come back, LMSRs and other types of military ships, and always had the idea that they're going into combat zones while we're going home. And we have, of course, 800 different military bases in over 150 different countries in the world. But we've had thousands and thousands of our troops get killed in the Middle East or die as a result of injuries they sustained in combat operations in the Middle East, in all of these different military operations. And not all of them, of course, die in the field in the Middle East, in Afghanistan or Iraq. They'll sometimes suffer severe combat injuries, and they'll be immediately medevaced to hospitals in Germany, for example. And the way that the U.S. government measures military losses, combat losses, if soldiers expire while they're outside the theater of operation, their deaths don't get counted as part of the statistics. And we've actually had more troops die outside the theater of operation, even though they sustained their injuries in Middle Eastern conflicts.
That's well, I suspected that much. Were you ever in the military yourself?
I was in Army ROTC, which isn't considered military, even though we were studying and training to be Army officers. I was going for light infantry, as light as you can go. You want to go with the highest speed, most motivated soldiers you can get. So I was going for airborne or Rangers or some other really light unit. When I dropped out of college, though, I wasn't able to finish, and I wasn't able to go in as an officer. So that didn't happen. I do have an honorary position as a major in the Civil Air Patrol, but that's not a combat unit. It's just an honorary position where we show support for the Civil Air Patrol and the mission that they perform.
Okay, gotcha. Now, what made you want to participate in it in the first place?
In the Civil Air Patrol, I was asked by other legislators if I was interested in doing it, and one of the reasons that I did drop out of politics a few years ago, and what motivated me to get back in was seeing the condition of a lot of our armed service veterans, and in particular in the VA, and the kind of mixed results in quality of health care that they were getting and the quality of the treatment that they were getting. And I felt that if I got back into it, I could. I knew quite a few state reps who did as much as they could for armed service veterans for constituent services, and I've done that. I've been able to do that a few times. Follow up with armed service veterans and do what I could to make sure that they got the best treatment they could.
Okay, gotcha. Now, for our listeners, we did write down a few things that we want to talk about. beforehand. Um, one of them is a police department.
So the town that I moved to is Seabrook, New Hampshire. When I moved here at first, I didn't think that we would have a corrupt police department. I know that there are corrupt police departments out there, but working in my job in road construction and in other fields and serving as a state legislator, I've had a lot of good experiences with public safety officers, whether they're firefighters or police officers, forest rangers, rescue workers. I've had a lot of good firsthand experience, but the Seabrook Police Department has a long history of police beatings, stealing from the gun range fund, stealing from the toy bank fund, stealing from crime scenes, stealing money and drugs from the evidence locker. I mean, the number of beatings, sexual assaults, drop charges in exchange for sexual favors. What I've heard from around town, the cocaine-fueled parties and whatnot have been absolutely terrible. So as a private citizen, I put in a citizen's petition to purchase dash cams for all the police cruisers to kind of keep them on video so that hopefully that would cut down on the number of beatings. Seabrook Police had the police chief show up, have the measure zeroed out at deliberative session, which is kind of like a town hall meeting. He had that zeroed out so the voters weren't even allowed to vote on it. And only a few months after the actual town hall meeting in March, a few months later, one of the police beating videos came out from the police station where they slam the guy's head into the wall and then throw him onto the ground and pepper spray him and laugh at him. The entire Seabrook Police Department knew about that one, and there have been dozens, if not hundreds, of other beatings over the years. It's just been a regular routine case, and it's resulted in many expensive lawsuits and millions of dollars in judgments, settlements, and legal fees over the years. And the vast majority of people in Seabrook have never heard about many of these abuses.
That's unbelievable. I mean, it is believable because I have seen that happening all over the country.
They beat a middle-aged woman so badly that she later died from internal bleeding, and there was a very large, expensive lawsuit against the police department. Unfortunately, most of the evidence came from her own testimony, so when she died from internal bleeding, the case had to be dismissed for lack of evidence, because really what they had was essentially the injuries that she sustained, which were maintained in medical records, but also her testimony was necessary to confirm, corroborate, and to authenticate evidence. And when she died, that case was lost. There was another case where a man was beaten about the head so badly that he had to have the whole upper part of his skull reconstructed by a cosmetic surgeon, and he won a $2 million lawsuit against the town. And the vast majority, despite the fact that the taxpayers all had their taxes go up, they were never told why they had to pay so much more in taxes. And it was in part to pay for the $2 million lawsuit, millions of dollars of other lawsuits for police beating, sexual assault, false imprisonment, that kind of thing.
That's just terrifying. It's terrifying because you're probably familiar with the Stanford prison experiment.
No, I'm not.
You're not? Okay, I'll send you a link to that. Basically, it was an experiment where people were put into two different positions. Random people, college students. You're either a prison guard or a prison inmate. And it got so violent, within 5 days, they had to shut down the experiment.
Oh, I think I heard about this in college.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the worst similar experiment was where you had people wearing masks. When people didn't have a mask and they were supposed to be electrocuting someone, at some point they had to stop. But as soon as you put a mask on people, they could continue increasing the electricity way beyond the safe voltage, and they would keep hitting the button and continuously electrocute their victims, not realizing that they weren't sending a real electric jolt. but so many of the violent groups like the Ku Klux Klan, the
No, there weren't
Antifa.
any masks. It was the Milgram experiment, but what it was is that they felt that they were under the authority of a scientific person, in a white coat.
Right, and I'm saying that just under authority, being given directives, but when you're seen, when you're known, when people can see your face, then there are certain limits to how violent people can be. But as soon as people are wearing a mask that covers their identity, then there are no limits to how much violence and how many terrible things that people will do to others. And so you have executioners throughout history who wear a mask. You have Antifa, you have all these violent groups, you have violent gangs, you have groups that have worn masks throughout history to execute some of the worst violence imaginable.
Yes. Yeah, because if you can dehumanize your victim, there's no limit. And if you're under authority, there's no limit. So we got a little bit deep here. Moving on to our next point. You mentioned something about senior citizens being targeted.
Was that veterans being targeted?
Veterans and senior citizens, both. Yeah.
I've noticed that, we've generally been told that African Americans get targeted more by the political system and that they have less recourse because they're not, as a group, considered an independent swing voting bloc. In fact, almost half of African American voters actually will vote independently. The problem is that most in America are clustered together in legislative and congressional districts that can't be flipped from Democrat to Republican or Libertarian or Independent or anything else. And that's what deprives them of the ability to have a direct impact on the political process. But senior citizens are the single largest independent voting bloc in the country, followed by veterans. And our armed service veterans, despite having so much say in the process, despite being the large independent voting bloc and despite living in a lot of swing voting districts, they are frequently targeted by prosecutors. They're treated unfairly. They sometimes don't get proper medical treatment from the VA. They face high suicide rates because of very high stress. They're often not treated well by the family courts. In fact, I put in a bill 4 years ago to ask the VA and Congress to investigate the causes of high rates of veteran suicides. It's still 21 veterans per day are taking their own lives.
Yeah.
And that failed terribly, and I kept at it and kept at it and kept at it. And just this year, I managed to get it passed unanimously through committee. It went to the floor and it passed unanimously on the floor. And now the message has gone up to Congress. So I'm hoping that they take some kind of action at that level to address the standard of care for veterans facing PTSD and other high stress risk issues that can contribute to veteran suicides and also other mental health issues. We found that when people are placed under large amounts of stress for long periods of time, that the mind can only take so much of it before human beings just finally give in. Physically, the way the brain is structured, it can only handle so much stress over an amount of time.
Correct. That is called learned helplessness, and it was studied by what's his name? Martin Seligman.
But on Saturday during the Libertarian presidential debate, Adam Kokesh, who's a longtime friend of mine, is a really great guy, and he's a Marine veteran. He admitted to still suffering PTSD all these years later because of what he experienced in Fallujah and what he experienced in his time over there, having to torture other people and seeing people get killed. It does wear you down, and your mind can only handle so much. And he still struggles with the problems from that. He's a great guy. I love talking to him, And my heart really goes out to him and all the other veterans who are still struggling from the emotional scars from their service.
Absolutely. Well, I have never been in the service, but I was in a civil war when I was 11, and I'm probably still scarred from that. Fortunately, I didn't have to kill anyone, but I saw things that no 11-year-old should ever see. So I'll just leave it at that. I absolutely empathize with Adam and with you. You know, this is PTSD, and there are treatments for it, but they're hard and they're expensive. Anyway, moving on. This is a depressing topic. Um, you wanted to talk about tactual voting.
Oh, tactical voting is
I see. I renamed it because
tactual.
tactual. Yeah, tactical. Okay.
Britain, Canada, the United States, India, and all of the other British descent countries still have something called first past the post plurality voting, meaning that you can have 3, 4, 5 different political parties in one area, but whichever party wins the most votes, even if they only win 34% of the vote, that party is the one that wins the election in that area. So we've seen this all over the world, and the solution that people use when they can't get their favorite party is they use tactical voting. And people don't like using tactical voting, but it seems to be the only workaround that we as voters can use until the politicians change the election laws. I put in a bill for approval voting, and I support ranked choice voting and instant runoff voting and other methods that give the voters a little more control over the process. Unfortunately, the powers that be don't seem to want that to happen. Democrats and Republicans, politicians, don't want to see the voters getting more control over the process. So they kind of sidestep us and block any effort at reform. So tactical voting is a method that we can use as voters to target entrenched Republican districts and entrenched Democrat districts there, and replace politicians with people who are not beholden to the party bosses. The Republican Party tends to have some tribalism where everybody has to kind of stick together as a group, and I felt some of that peer pressure when I was serving as a Republican legislator. Now, of course, I'm a libertarian legislator, so I'm kind of free of all that in theory. The Democrats, it comes from the top down, where the party bosses tell them how they have to vote, and if they don't vote the way the party bosses tell them, then they get primaried and they get forced out of office. So it's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. But tactical voting, so you have 170 entrenched Republican House districts for the U.S. Congress. You have only 90 swing voting districts, but you have 170 entrenched Democrat districts. So how can we as libertarians get libertarians elected? We use a tool called tactical voting. So if you are a Republican or a conservative or a small business owner, a taxpayer, a school choice voter who lives in an entrenched Democrat district, all the Democrats vote the wrong way on those issues. They vote for more government, more taxes, more spending. So we go to the same Republican voters there and we say, look, we're campaigning hard here and doing the get out the vote efforts and getting the signs up, and we're campaigning. The Republican Party has basically abandoned this area. So we kind of use the same base of 30% of Republican voters who they know that they're not winning there, but at least they can support libertarians who at least can cost the Democrats a seat. And if you look at the presidential election, there are 14 safe blue wall states. There are 16 battleground states in the middle that could go either way, but there are 20 safe Republican states. So if you're a liberal or progressive voter and you live in one of the 20 safe Republican states, well, there's nothing you can do. There's no way you can have any impact. You might hate Donald Trump. You might hate the Republican Party. You might even be a pro-choice voter, or you want to end the war on drugs. But it's completely hopeless because that whole state is going to go Republican every single year, and they've gone Republican for 30, 40, 50, 60, some of them, almost 100 years. They've always gone Republican, and the Democrats can't win because they're becoming more and more socialist and more authoritarian, and they are hurting the economies and hurting the job markets and hurting manufacturing in some of these small town areas. So the Democrats can't win, but some of those 20 states, the libertarians could win some of those states. And likewise,
that's the stuff I want to hear. Yes.
So if you're a Republican who lives in a city and that city goes Democrat every single year for city council, for state legislature, for Congress, and it's the same routine year after year after year, and your taxes are going through the roof, urban voters tend to be more fiscally conservative than almost any other voter, and they're also being taxed to death at the same time. But they're very socially liberal as a group.
Yes.
According to polling data. So what the Democrats do is they just focus on the social issues, and they distract people from all the stealing and scams and overpriced boondoggle projects and kickbacks. So the Libertarian Party is a much better fit for urban areas. So if you're a taxpayer, school choice voter, Second Amendment voter, whatever your particular issue is, you're a small business owner, you want to protect your business from being regulated to death, well, you can just vote Libertarian, and it's a closer fit for urban environments. Whereas if you're a liberal voter living in rural, I don't know, Indiana or Montana, Wyoming, Alaska, those states always go Republican every year. Now you can vote Libertarian. As long as we carefully target those voters, we can convince most of them to vote Libertarian to cost the other party a seat.
Okay, so I personally prefer to live in a city, and it's an interesting experience because you get some Republicans, some Democrats, but most of the time people are just not political. They're enjoying their life, and they're busy because they're engineers, professors, this and this and that. They don't care about any of this.
Mm-hmm. And you get very low voter turnout in a lot of cities, and especially the poorer parts of inner cities. They have less than 20% voter turnout in some areas.
Right.
So
that's not the kind of the city I live in. This is the village part of the city, but they just don't care. I tried to bring it up at my HOA meeting a couple of weeks ago, and they were like, we're not interested in politics. We're not going to vote for anything. Oh, shoot. So that's why I believe 60% of the country doesn't even vote.
Yeah, it's about half during presidential election years, and 60 to 70% stay home in off years. But
Right.
That's actually advantageous because once you've identified, it's more work on the part of the volunteers and the party itself. But once you've identified the voters who care about their issue, especially small business owners, and especially school choice voters, they'll turn out and vote third party. And they've shown that they'll turn out and vote third party. And pretty much everywhere except for the Deep South will vote third party. Deep South is kind of, people tend to be loyal to their party, their team, which isn't true of everyone. But outside of that, pretty much everywhere in the snow belt, people will turn out and vote third party.
I know some folks there in the Deep South that are probably some of the most passionate libertarian advocates in the whole country.
Yes, definitely. But you need a combination of things. You need the donors, you need the candidates, you need the volunteers, and you need people with the technical prowess to kind of bring everything together and really focus on get out the vote efforts. Some Republicans have found that if they spend a year going out and campaigning. Even in urban areas, they can win city council and mayoral races, but it's a hell of a campaign because you're trying to overcome, the fact that the Republican Party in recent years the brand name has become toxic in the cities because it's become kind of Southern strategy, right-wing populist. Some of the messaging is kind of harsh. And then you have, granted, this isn't it's not the fault of the vast majority of Republican candidates out there, but sometimes on right-wing talk radio, and sometimes certain groups will say negative things about LGBT folks and say that something's a mental health issue, or they'll trash Muslims as a group, or there will just be a tiny, tiny number of people saying really negative things about certain ethnic, religious, or gender minorities. And it's obvious when the Democrats are doing class warfare. It's obvious when the Democrats are using race baiting and getting into demographics and identity politics. But it's less obvious when you have right-wing talk radio. It's less obvious when you have some comments online that are really toxic and really hostile to certain economic minorities, religious minorities, and others who really feel that it has become a struggle to get accepted in the society that they live in. And, maybe back in the days of Reagan or Eisenhower, the Republican Party was much more open and much more welcoming, and it was winning cities, and the Republican Party was winning the Northeast and the West Coast and other very high immigrant areas. And now the Republican Party is losing those same areas, because not necessarily because all your Republican candidates, it's losing those areas because the party itself is being seen as promoting division rather than bringing people together. So the messaging has changed, and the result has been that it's really lost the cities. And you can go into some cities and 85-90% of the people are, if they vote at all, they vote Democrat. And it's because they feel like their perception is that it's become abrasive.
They feel like they're being attacked.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, why would you build why would you build a wall on the border with Mexico but not Canada, kind of thing. And it's like, why is there so much ferocity and so much anger there? For a lot of kind of law and order conservatives and defense conservatives, it's more about just making sure that the law gets followed, and anger that that immigration laws are being ignored. Change the laws however you want, but for a lot of them, it's really more about the law being broken. But for a small number of people, there are a few people in our society who would like to just kind of pull up the drawbridge and stop immigration altogether. And it feels like it's that there's some hostility out there to the immigrants themselves, and that really shouldn't be there. We should have a welcoming country and a welcoming environment that accepts everyone who's here, that people should feel like they're guests in our country.
Yeah, I think that would be productive, but what do I know? I'm only from one of the oldest countries in the world that has always survived exactly on that, surrounded by dynasties, and they were always welcoming, and they're still around. So we'll see. There was another point you wanted to cover, which was experience of the candidates.
So I was asked a couple of times, why is it I decided to run? My main motivation, of course, is to bring the troops home.
Right. Yes.
But I saw the debates that were going on, and my first impression was that none of the candidates I saw in one debate gave a straight yes or no answer to any question that was asked. And worse than that, it was getting very theoretical. And I've served on budget committee. I currently serve on my town's planning board. I've served as constable. I've served as trustee of the trust funds. And I've got 2 terms in now as a state legislator. And you really have to, before you run for higher office, we've always said, for as long as I've been in the Libertarian Party, more than 20 years now, we've always said, if you want to go for federal office, go get elected to local office first. And we have more and more people in the Libertarian Party saying, don't even bother asking for my support until you've served in local office. And I've even noticed that a lot of people ask me, have I served in local office, before they'll even consider giving me a vote. And I do pick up a few free votes just being the only candidate for president among the field right now who served in elective office. There are so many different ways that experience helps with how you reduce lawsuits from impact fees that are collected for regional school districts, that are collected and misused for vehicles or operation costs. There are so many different ways to change the way bonds are paid for. Using a 10-year bond instead of a 15-year bond, you cut your total interest payments by about half just by using a 10-year bond. A lot of times they dangle federal funds in front of you, and if you take the federal funds, it looks like free money, but it really is a trap. That if you take CHIF or police funds, under Bill Clinton, they dangled the 100,000 police on the streets. They only provided enough funding for 18,000. And once you take the 2 years of free funding, when the 2 years of free money runs out, you have to keep these police on the streets who, in some of these small towns, and especially towns with declining populations, you still have to have an oversized police department. And you have to keep that oversized police department forever, even as your population continues to go down and down and down and down.
Yeah.
So a lot of special ed requirements, a lot, $300,000 to $600,000 a year per student for some special ed students. For super special ed, regular special ed could be $30,000 to $130,000. Super special ed in some cases can go over $1 million per year per student. It's all because, and you have to provide what the federal government thinks is an education, rather than what the parents or the general public thinks is a good education. And it all comes from not understanding the details of how federal mandates work, not being able to explain to the public how the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Fair Housing Act are being misused to circumvent rules on sober living facilities, and that's leading to litigation at the local level. Cities and towns are being sued because the fire marshal is trying to enforce safety rules on sober living facilities, whether you believe that should be the case or not. Until you've gotten firsthand experience as a legislator or as someone who served in local office, there's no way to understand why towns keep getting sued, why counties keep getting sued. Yes. Why we have so many people going through the revolving door prison system. Until you've actually talked to rank and file police officers and rank and file firefighters and paramedics, it's hard to understand where all the waste is and why things are getting so expensive.
Yes, and I see this this whole kill the police and that kind of stuff. I don't like that black and white thinking, because there are people who are police officers who are there to actually protect people. So just throwing everybody under the bus because of their profession is just as bad, in my mind, as it is to say that every illegal immigrant is a criminal.
And there's a tendency throughout society to stereotype people. I have some people in my town who hate all cops, and I have some people in my town who love all cops. And when people tend to stereotype by class, by gender, by background, by occupation,
Mm-hmm.
they tend to ignore the facts. So they already go in with a presumption of innocence or guilt based on your occupation or how you look or how old you are. And I hear this in the legislature all the time. They'll use grandma. Grandma is always the innocent party. They'll say grandma, well, if grandma is smoking marijuana, or if grandma is filling out some forms, or if grandma is starting a business, or if grandma is doing this, that, or the other thing. Grandma is always supposed to be the good guy. Well, when you look at a lot of wrongful conviction cases and insurance fraud, life insurance fraud cases where people, they take out an insurance policy on somebody and they kill their own family member for money, and the grandparents are just as likely to be culprits as anyone else. As evil people, as they get older, they remain evil. And yet we have this set of stereotypes that we live with. As far as cops are concerned, I always say the 90% of cops I work with who are good people shouldn't have to suffer for the 10% of cops who are bad. And the 10% of cops who are bad are terrible. They are horrible bullies, rapists, murderers, thieves, drug dealers. Cops are being caught. There's 7 to 10 new YouTube videos going up every week with cops being caught sometimes by their own dash cam or by their own body cam or by a surveillance video or somebody's cell phone camera,
Right.
showing cops planting drugs on people. But it's only a small percentage of the cops. And the officers and emergency responders who are doing the best work that they can shouldn't have to suffer for the crooked cops who are out there. So absolutely everyone should get the benefit of the doubt, but there should be the same high standard, and there should be a thorough, honest investigation. And if the politicians, I have politicians in my town who've been on the board of selectmen for more than 10 years, and they're absolutely crooked, and they just cover up for all the criminal wrongdoing by crooked police officers, but they understand that that's just how it is.
Yeah, yeah, that's unfortunate. It's terrible, actually. It's more than unfortunate. So, I've been lucky over here in San Diego. Police officers here are pretty much friendly and they just show up and do their job. But there have been a couple of cases of them shooting somebody for no reason or shooting somebody's dog for no reason. And I just don't generalize that to everybody who works in that profession.
That's true. I don't think there's any large police department in the country. I don't think there's any large company in the country or any large organization where every single person is completely honest. You're always going to find a few bad apples here and there. Even in nonprofit charities and hospitals, you still find a few bad people here and there. Some of the best organizations, religious organizations, religious charities, you're always going to find a few bad apples in almost any organization, even the military or Salvation Army. I'm sure you can find some, one or two people who've embezzled money, something. It doesn't mean that we just completely stop as a society and withdraw amongst ourselves. It means that we, raise the standards of accountability and make sure that when innocent people are falsely accused, that they prevail, and that when innocent people are victimized by the bad guys, that the innocent person prevails and the bad guy goes to jail like they're supposed to.
Right. So, just a random question. This wasn't on our agenda. Are you a religious man?
I'm a Protestant, and I do go to church. I don't campaign on that. I think that everyone who knows me knows that I'm a church-going Christian. But when I'm on the political stage or the political scene, I don't go out like some politicians and spend all this time, trying to take advantage of religious division that might exist in society. I think that we have to have elected officials who believe in an afterlife and believe that there will be consequences in the next life for the things that they do in this life. But I also believe that our elected officials and our other public servants should be doing the job and representing everyone equally and working just as hard for everyone equally, regardless of their religious views.
Okay, that's an excellent answer. Follow-up question. Did you grow up as a Protestant?
Yeah, my family has been Protestant. In fact, my mother was Episcopalian going back, I think, before even I was born, and I was baptized Episcopalian, and now I'm non-denominational. My feelings are that whatever the Bible says, that must be true, and if you have some TV evangelist or some other person putting themselves out there as a religious leader and then taking some political positions, I'm going to go to the Bible, what the Bible says, rather than what some possibly self-interested person is pushing.
That's wonderful. I love hearing this because I have encountered some religious people who are, well, just very aggressive and mean.
Some of them believe whatever they're told, and if the pastor is not a good communicator and he's deviating from scripture and he's talking about what he hates, what he doesn't like seeing in society, or if he's pandering to division in order to keep people together. There are religious officials who make a living almost every sermon. They're trashing gays and lesbians, or they're attacking one group or another of heathens. But we're not called upon in the Bible to be like other Christians. We're called upon to be like Christ. And Christ was socially inclusive and socially tolerant. He was accepting of everyone. And he told sinners, we're all born unto sin. He told people that, yes, you've sinned, but you're forgiven for all your sins. Now go and sin no more. Absolutely everyone, even tax collectors. Matthew the tax collector, some of the most hated people in society were tax collectors in those days. And yet even Matthew was forgiven for being a tax collector. Now, don't be a tax collector anymore for the Romans. Now he's told by Christ, follow me and I'll make you a fisher of men, as he used to say.
It's acceptance. And let me see if I can formulate this. Not looking at somebody else as the other, not tribalizing. I think that's very important. I think that is one of the most important messages from the Bible.
My favorite is the Sermon on the Mount, when he says, when you're taking the wood chip out of your brother's eye, first be sure to take the plank out of your own eye.
Yes.
So that you can better see the wood chip in your brother's eye.
Exactly. Well, we went deep here. All right. So, what kind of names do you get called on Facebook? Tell me some of the funniest ones.
Most recently, I was called the Republican, quote, the Republican, unquote. And I've noticed I've been called that 3 or 4 times recently.
And who is that?
By libertarians who know that I've been a member of the Libertarian Party for like 25 years now. And they know that I've been in, and they've met me at other groups and gatherings and state conventions and national conventions and political events. And they know that I have been running as a libertarian candidate for years and years and doing the ballot access. And I've manned tables with them and done recruiting drives with people and getting our candidates on the ballot. And they're like, the Republican, because I voted in the Republican primary, because we have full-blown Libertarian Party members in the New Hampshire legislature. But because of the way the ballot rules are set up in New Hampshire, they had to run as Republicans, And then for me to vote for them, I had to re-register as a Republican in order to vote for libertarians. And it's weird and it's confusing how it all works. And
Yeah.
certain individuals or hecklers just show up. And what irks me is that some of the hecklers are like libertarian officials. If you're just a delegate or an LP member, you can say whatever you want about anyone you want. But if you're serving as a Libertarian Party official, an official of the National Libertarian Party, and then you're intervening and interfering with our primary process, then you're taking sides. And I don't think people like it when the LNC takes sides, and I think people hate it when they see someone coming in and pretending to speak for the Libertarian Party nationally, and they're showing up to our events and they're just absolutely trashing one candidate or preferring one candidate over another. It's, leave it up to the membership to decide. It really shouldn't be up to the party officials.
Yes, it's another tribal thing. So, I mean, somebody called you a Republican. I think that might have been me. I said the Republican guy. I want to tag him.
Oh,
Remember?
why is it that I'm wearing a suit and I stand up straight and I look all professional and I don't have a hat on my head? I don't have a boot or a giant colorful anything. And when I show up to meetings, I show up sober. I was surprised to see one of the candidates in the debate was just smoking weed right there. He was smoking marijuana during the debate, and he was so high he really couldn't put sentences together to form a coherent paragraph of an idea. He was just.
Was that Dan or Adam?
I'm trying to think. Who was smoking weed last? Adam? No. Brian, maybe?
Who's Brian?
Brian Leader?
Oh, Ben Letter.
Oh, Ben Letter. Yeah, he was smoking weed. Why, did somebody else smoke on the air?
I don't know.
The debates, the Libertarian Party is like
yes, I know.
Conservatism's cool cousin. So we share some things on economics with conservatives, but we're cool with everybody. And the problem with that is we're cool with absolutely everybody.
Yeah, I'm not. Are you?
Well, I mean, Jesus said, accept everyone and love your brother and don't, judge not lest ye be judged. But I think that anyone seeing somebody, if you're having a national presidential debate and you're smoking weed, I'm just foreseeing selecting that candidate and putting them on the debate stage with Donald Trump and Harris or whoever the picked DNC flunky is going to be. They have a lot of people didn't realize until the 2016. Oh, what's that?
DNC has Marianne. She's into orbs and vibrations, and she's really spiritual.
No, I mean DNC, like the DNC's rigged primary process. As of 2016, a lot of young people became awake to the fact that the DNC runs a rigged primary process top to bottom, and that they're just absolutely corrupt. They're just totally corrupt. And they've picked all their candidates for presidential usually about 2 years out, and then right now they're working on their Senate and congressional, who's going to get picked based on seniority. And then usually around April or May, they picked all their legislative people. So yeah, they have a primary, but very few people bother to vote in the Democratic primary because they already know that the machine's already rigged for their slate of candidates. It's not just the presidential, it's top to bottom. It's the Democrat Party is totally controlled by the party insiders. And you really have if you're stuck in an entrenched Democrat district, you have no representation. I had a friend who was down in Massachusetts, and he had his Democrat legislator finally come out, and he just walked right up to him and told him he was asking him to do something for some bill, and this Democrat legislator came out and told him to F off or go F himself, and walked her out because he doesn't care.
Podcast, so it's okay.
But he said he said that the guy just walked out and didn't care. And he gets reelected every year because he's got the nod from all the Democrat Party insiders. And as long as he just votes the way he's told year after year after year, it doesn't matter. He's always, always, always going to get reelected until he gets his legislative pension, which is pretty lucrative.
True. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
In California, the Democrat legislators there have voted themselves pay raises to the point where they're making like six figures. And then when they exhaust their term limits, after I guess 12 terms or 12 years, they then, if they voted the way they're told, they then get a fake job working for the state 1 day a month for $150,000 a year. And then they keep doing that for a while and they pull yet another pension out of that. So they're retiring on maybe close to $200,000 a year, including benefits.
Yeah, that's that's normal income over here.
But that's just brazen stealing from the taxpayers. And it's if you live in California, it's unfortunate. Even if you're actively involved as a voter, it doesn't matter because the machine shows up and they crack the whip on all their kind of victim groups. And they say, oh no, if Ronald Reagan gets reelected, you're going to get thrown out in the street. And I remember hearing that when I was a little kid and thinking, why would Ronald Reagan fly all the way out here and throw us out in the street to provide, tax cuts for the rich or something like that? And sure enough, Ronald Reagan got reelected and none of the terrible doom and gloom things happened. But that wasn't the purpose. The purpose of the scare tactics was to win one election and to get voters hating Republicans. And that was the reason that these officials, even on taxpayers' time, were going around using that scare tactic on the people living in public housing units.
California is actually a lot more Republican than a lot of people realize.
San Diego is.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to the presidential election, isn't it like 2-1?
Oh, what do you mean?
In the presidential election and the Senate races, isn't it 2-1?
Yeah.
The Republicans have almost no base there, and so they basically are starting from about 10% and having to work their way up. Might as well just have a third party.
Right. So you have to understand, a lot of people who live out here in Southern California are a lot older. They're retired and they have money. So they usually vote Republican.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But for California in general, like Los Angeles County, San Francisco, and Oakland, parts of that are like 90% Democrat. And it's really just the San Francisco Bay Area is like 90% Democrat. And then outside of that, the rest of the state is a swing state. But it's just the weight of that one area ends up carrying the whole state.
Right. And for me to drive to San Francisco, it was about 12 hours. It's very far away from here. So when people generalize, oh, you're a Californian, I'm like, I'm not anywhere near San Francisco. You don't understand.
But when I was in San Francisco, there was kind of this there's kind of a general oblivious, not knowing, not caring. And then the talking points were the weirdest part. I was in Los Angeles County, waiting in line maybe at Starbucks, and politics came up, and I'm talking about all the corruption and how bad things are. And they would say, well, yeah, but you get your money's worth. And I said, no, you don't. State and local taxes in states with Democrat legislatures are almost twice as high. Yet, if you look at the conditions of roads and other public buildings are falling apart. Every ghetto in America is run by Democrats. All 15 of the 15 highest crime counties are run by Democrats. And every city, state, and county in the country that's either on the verge of bankruptcy or receivership is run by Democrats. And it's the same, unemployment's twice as high, state and local taxes are twice as high, things are just much, much worse. And it's because the party has been attracting, the lowest of the low, and almost everyone with standards has woken up to the fact that they just lie and lie and lie to get their way, get themselves into office. They promise things that they have no intention of delivering on, the free stuff, and then they get in and they're just stealing everything that isn't bolted down.
Sure. At the same time, I think California is doing much better than a lot of haters think it is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's the largest
San Diego
in the world.
San Diego, Kevin Faulkner, who is kind of, I would say he kind of strikes me as kind of a liberty Republican. I would say he seems to agree more with modern libertarians than with, say, Donald Trump or even Arnold Schwarzenegger. Arnold Schwarzenegger is very much pro-immigration. And yet at the same time, so San Diego is pretty well run because there's a lot of competition in the political arena. And Kevin Faulkner, in a three-way race, won 58% of the vote. And I think the reason that he did is because I think people perceive that he did a very good job of making a business-friendly climate, getting taxes down, getting spending down, and just generally doing a better job of running the city government than, the other guy who was pretty much just backed by union officials and lawyers and school administrators and the other Democrat constituencies. But
yeah, Faulkner is okay. I think we can do better, but we'll see.
He's a nice guy.
Yeah, I know. I've talked to him. He's a nice guy. But being nice is not is not enough in my book. So we're moving on. How do you talk to people who are not libertarian or maybe not political at all and try to introduce them to?
So I've talked to, when I was a libertarian candidate for governor, I talked to different people differently based on the issues that they're talking about and the way that they're talking. So when I talk to high school students, it's a little bit difficult because we have our approach to reducing drug use and drug addiction is to end the war on drugs and kind of get the federal government out of it, get things down to the local level, and offer treatment, prevention, and recovery support instead of prison. But we tend to want to use local churches, local charities, family, traditional institutions, civil society, rather than a big top-heavy federal bureaucracy. And certainly, we'd rather use treatment, prevention, and recovery support rather than prisons, continuing to use the prison industry. So that's kind of a concrete way of addressing it. Dealing with college students and college-age students, it's a little bit different. You're talking to them in terms of, you have the right as a full-grown adult, as an American, you have the right to decide what to put into or take out of your own body. You have the right to live your life the way you choose, so long as you're not harming anyone else. You have the right to spend, save, invest, donate your own money as you see fit. Of course, college students never seem to don't have money, so the economic freedom is less, it's de-emphasized, and we tend to focus on personal freedom, internet privacy, cell phone privacy, LGBT rights, legalizing marijuana, even controversial issues like lowering the drinking age to 18 and some of these other goodies, on college campuses and in younger areas, people under 25, almost everyone seems to agree with us on lowering the drinking age. When we use examples, when we use stories about arrests, shutting down lemonade stands is kind of a universal thing. When we talk to people in their 30s, and especially parents, we talk to them about raising and educating your children according to your own standards, rather than having the state come in and tell them how to run their schools. I think almost all libertarians support school choice, but more importantly, fundamentally, respecting parents' right to raise and educate their children according to their own standards, rather than bypassing the parents and pushing cultural Marxism and all this other stuff. So when we talk to people, retirees,
Parents want to send their children to public school. Isn't that their choice too?
I believe that parents have the right to send their money and their child to any public, private, charter school, magnet school, boarding school, whatever they feel works best for their child. And
Right, to send their kid to a public school?
right.
Okay. Well, you said you support all of their rights, but that one you don't support.
No, we would absolutely support your right if you're crazy enough to send your kid to your money and your child to a public school. If all schools are supported basically with tuition or something like tuition, then you can still send your money and your child to a public school. But now the public schools would have to perform as well as private schools and charter schools and magnet schools and boarding schools, because they'd have to compete for your money. This idea.
That's a good idea. That's a very good idea. Now, did you go to public or a private school?
Combination. Homeschooled, public school. I was offered the chance to go to a private school for a couple of years at no cost, and I don't know why I turned it down. I just wanted to go with the rest of the kids. I really should have gone to a private school for those 2 years. I went to both public and private colleges and universities. So trade schools, technical schools. I have a pretty broad experience. About half of my life so far has been in some kind of formal schooling. Community college, university, I think just about everything.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I went to public school when I was a kid.
So a little bit of history. From colonial times until almost World War II, almost all American kids went to private tuition-funded schools. And even if they went to a public school, it was still a tuition-funded public school. And our schools, because they were tuition-funded, had to be good. In fact, they were the best in the world. And our school systems, our private schools, were the envy of the world. Even to this day, our private schools are still really good. And our colleges and universities are still tuition funded, and they're still really good. They're still the best in the world. But if you go to the Communist Party's website, the robber barons, socialists, and communists during the 1920s and 30s slowly changed us from private tuition-funded schooling to government-run, politician-run, taxpayer-funded schools. And they did so explicitly to produce reliable, unquestioning factory workers who would just show up every day, do as they were told, run the machines, go home, take their meager paycheck, and spend it, get into debt, and just kind of go through the routine. And they wanted a tame workforce and a tame electorate, and they got it. And the communists, the Communist Party USA website, they really admit that they did this. This was part of their effort here. And anytime anyone stands up and says, hey, why don't we go back to tuition-funded schools, they flip out, they start screaming. There'll be some child in the inner city somewhere who's a genius and won't be able to go to a government school, and everything they can possibly do, yelling, shouting, screaming, everything. And yet it's absolutely ridiculous. If you sit back and look at it, there's nowhere else in our society where we would just sit back and let the communists just nationalize something, and we would just sit back and do nothing. You never let them do that with cars. And yet far more important than the car you drive is the quality of your education. These kids get one shot in life. They get one chance at an excellent education. And these socialist and communist activists have been kind of working through the political process to take that away so they can get more and more jobs for their buddies through their fellow travelers at the union hall, the union officials and the school administrators, and all the Democrat rhino politicians are all part of this kind of club. and they're now charging taxpayers in New England $18,000 per year per student for a public school system that really, from their vantage point, just exists to create jobs for their buddies.
Okay, Max. I got your point. Communists bad. So let me give you an example. Personally, I grew up in the Soviet Union, and the education system there was far superior to here. When I came here, when I was 14, I went to school in a very high-rated school in Des Moines, Iowa. And everything that was being taught at senior grade level was things that I learned in 6th grade. So I took all the AP classes and I never even had to study anything. How do you explain that?
So they found a 4th grade level math textbook from America from the 1850s, I think 1855.
Yeah, that's probably what happened. Yes.
When textbooks went from one textbook per classroom to the printing presses became more efficient, and now it was one textbook per child. But they looked at these 4th grade level math textbooks, and the questions in the book were all 10th grade level. So you had kids who were 9 years old studying 10th grade level math problems. And in the back of the book, the questions were all at the college level, advanced high school or college level.
Mm-hmm.
And why is it that you have 9 and 10-year-olds perfectly capable of college level mathematics, and they're being deprived of that, and they're being kept at a slow, laborious, remedial level of math, reading, science?
I don't know.
Well, it's to dumb down the kids, and it's a government-run monopoly that has no incentive to do anything but provide guaranteed employment for the teachers' unions and school administrators and all their flunkies. And that's the reality of it. And almost every educated person in society who takes a close look at the public school system, the government school system, is designed to produce unthinking, unquestioning automatons who don't even realize that they've lost their most fundamental rights as human beings. It's designed to produce unthinking factory workers. In fact, that's what the advocates of it were arguing for in the 19-teens and 1920s, including Woodrow Wilson and John Dewey and so many of these others, so many of the socialist activists. They were openly pushing for the robber barons. They were openly pushing for a system that would produce unquestioning workers who would just kind of be quote unquote good citizens and do as they're told.
Yes, absolutely. This is such an interesting subject, and I want to send you links to a couple of books. If you don't mind, I will do that. I mean, that's not for our listeners, but I have one final question for you, which is about microwaving burritos and protein shakes. And please be prepared that most people who are on the keto diet, which is most libertarians, are going to be very upset about this.
Well, I used to be a really good cook because I loved cooking, and I've run out of space in my kitchen because I've got housemates and they have pots and pans that some of them wash and some of them don't. So I don't have any space left on my island, so I just reach into the fridge or the freezer, and I grab a burrito and I throw it in the microwave for 33 seconds, and that's what I end up eating. Or if I have to eat about 200 grams of protein a day because I work out a lot, and I want to build as much muscle as I can without building fat. And so I eat a lot of protein bars, and I make a lot of protein shakes to make sure that I can always get over 200 grams of protein, so that your body always knows that there's a surplus of protein, so it doesn't try to economize on muscle mass. And you want to build up as much muscle mass as you can So you've got to eat a lot of protein every single day. So I just mix it all up, whey protein, almond milk, and then throw in some peanut butter to go with it.
Right, and we talked about peanut butter before.
You don't like the carbs.
No.
But you have to have some carbs no matter what. I mean, you have to have, I mean, even if you're trying to just slim down and starve yourself, if you completely starve yourself of carbohydrates, it's really bad for you.
Not really.
Yeah, huh? How are you going to live? You need some carbs in your system. Where are you going to get the energy from if you're trying to convert all that, protein and
it turns your fat in your body into ketones.
The carbs?
No, when your body is not getting any carbohydrates, it starts turning the fat in your body into ketones, and it gets processed through your liver. That's how weight loss works.
So you're trying to just do straight ketosis for months at a time and starve yourself of all carbohydrates and beer and sugar and anything that's good.
No.
Yeah.
I did it when I was 27 years old for about 4 months, and I lost all the weight that I gained by moving to the US, and it worked. And now I just keep conscious of not eating too much sugary. I mean, I don't even like sugar, but things like pasta and potatoes, I don't eat that.
All my life, as long as I've avoided sugar, I've been in terrific shape. In fact, I went 2 years with absolutely no sugar whatsoever, and I was ripped. My muscles were huge. I had nothing but energy. I'd had a perfect six pack. I was in terrific shape, and it was easy to build up muscle mass, and I slept well, and everything was terrific. Sugar is the worst thing out there. You should just never have any sugar at all if you can avoid it.
Yeah, I think sugar is worse than crack.
They've done experiments. You won't believe this. They do these experiments in a university, and they bring all the new college students in. And the first study that they show, they bring the rats in. The Oreo cookies, they'll lace the brown chocolate shell with cocaine or heroin, and they get the rats addicted to cocaine or heroin. And they do this study every time. Mm-hmm. And the rats come in and they go right for that cookie shell and they tear it apart and they get rid of it and they go right for the creamy center. They gotta have that sugar. That sugar is so addictive, it controls everything that they do. And their whole life is now organized around getting that sugar. Even if they're addicted to crack, they'll push the crack aside in the cookie. They'll tear that cookie shell apart and they go right for that creamy center because they gotta have that sugar. It's the most addictive substance, and it kills more people in America because of obesity, heart disease, diabetes, so many other medical conditions.
Yeah, we have a prognosis now that by 2020, 30% of children in the United States are going to have type 2 diabetes.
I'm not surprised because the amount of sugar is just increasing and increasing and increasing in our diet. Everything's got sugar now, and it's hard to escape it.
I know. Unless you cook your own meals like I do.
Oh. So you must be a terrific cook by now.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm terrific. I think I'm intermediate, pretty good.
Every single item I pick up at the grocery store, I turn it over and I look for that one thing. How much sugar is in here? If I can keep myself down to just a few grams, 10 or 20 grams of sugar a day, I'm in terrific shape. And if I break that and I have too much sugar and too much alcohol in my system in a day, then I start putting on weight. All I have to do is keep the sugar off and I'm fantastic.
That's awesome. Our listeners should tune in for our other podcasts about nutrition. I think you and I are a match on this one.
But I'm not giving up peanut butter.
All right, fine. Okay, we can.
It's so
Okay.
good. Peanut
So,
butter is good with everything.
all right. So how about that? I don't. I just don't like the taste of it.
I would have peanut butter ice cream. I'll have a peanut butter protein shake. When I need to, I get a protein bar. I get the chocolate peanut butter protein bar. I love it. I love it more than dogs love peanut butter.
Isn't it bad for dogs?
No, dogs can have peanut butter. People put a little bit of peanut butter on top of their nose, and the dog will just lick at their nose for, 10 minutes. Dogs love peanut butter. I mean, I guess if you had some peanut butters, they add lots and lots of sugar, which is bad. Dogs should never get any sugar because their digestive system is not set up to handle it. But if it's just regular peanuts or peanut butter, I don't think that's a bad thing. I used to pick up pure peanut butter. In fact, you go to the machine and it just has a whole bunch of peanuts in it and nothing else. And you flip the switch, and right in front of you at the health food store, it would grind up the peanuts into peanut butter and push it right into a little jar in front of you, and you'd buy the peanut butter that way. That was my favorite way of getting peanut
I can do that at Whole Foods.
That's the best way to get it because you're just getting straight peanuts, and you're not getting anything else.
Yes. I've only done that with almonds. So I guess our point of contention here is that I prefer almond butter to peanut butter.
That's true. It is better for you. Almonds cut down on cancer risk and some other bad stuff.
Yeah. So that's where we're at. So Max, it has been such a pleasure to have you on my podcast. Can we do this again? We have to do the nutritional one.
Okay. Well, I'll let you talk for the nutritional one because it sounds like you know a little bit more than I do.
I probably do, but I think you have given a lot of information that a lot of people will appreciate. And also, I think that people need to know who you are. And I'm very, very happy that you were here with me tonight. Thank you so much.
It was great being on your show.
Thank you.